You have no idea how many people in this country have quietly done the maths, looked at the numbers, and decided it is no longer worth trying. Not loudly, not with a protest or a headline, just a slow, private surrender that nobody announces and nobody really counts. And here is what most people do not realize. It is not a fringe thing anymore. It is not the story of a few unlucky people who fell through the cracks. The number of Britons who have genuinely stopped trying to get ahead, stopped saving, stopped planning, and in some cases stopped working altogether is larger than any official figure will tell you. And it is spreading faster than anyone expected. This is not happening in some distant place. It is happening across Britain right now. In terraced streets in Stoke and Sunderland, in council estates in Cardiff and Coventry, in semi-detached houses in towns that used to feel solid and no longer do, and the people doing it are not who you think they are. So what does it actually mean to tap out? What does it look like from the inside? And what does it say about where this country is heading? Take a moment with this question, because the answer is more uncomfortable than most people are ready for. Britain has always told itself a particular story. Work hard, stay disciplined, and you will be rewarded. Not rich, necessarily, but stable. A home, a pension, something to pass on. That story held for long enough that an entire generation built their identity around it. And then, piece by piece, the math stopped adding up. Council tax bills that went up by 40 or 50 pounds a year for years running. Energy standing charges that now cost more per month than some people spent on their entire gas bill a decade ago. Rents in ordinary towns, not London, not Bristol, towns that nobody outside them has ever heard of, hitting £1,200 a month for a two-bedroom house. And wages that have moved, technically on paper, but have not moved anywhere near fast enough to keep pace with any of it. Here is a figure from the Office for National Statistics that deserves more attention than it gets. In the decade between the early 2000s and the mid-2010s, real household disposable income in the United Kingdom grew consistently year on year. In the decade that followed, it stalled. And in recent years, for millions of households in the bottom half of the income distribution, it has gone backwards in real terms. That means people are earning more pounds and affording less. And a growing number of them have registered that fact and stopped pretending otherwise. That is the foundation of what tapping out actually means. It is not laziness. It is a rational response to an equation that no longer works. Meet someone like Gary. He is 53 years old. He worked in logistics for 22 years, driving and then supervising routes across the Midlands. He has lived in the same town in Shropshire for most of his adult life. He is not someone who ever expected to be rich. He expected to own his house by now. He expected to have a pension worth something. He expected, in his own words, to be comfortable enough not to think about it every day. He does not own his house. His private pension was frozen during a period between jobs and never fully recovered. And 3 years ago, after running the numbers one more time on a kitchen table covered in bills and statements, he made a decision that he describes this way. I stopped trying to get ahead. I decided to just survive and stop feeling guilty about it. Gary is not on benefits. He still works, but he no longer overtime. He no longer puts money aside. He no longer makes plans beyond the next 3 months. He told himself it was temporary. He is not sure anymore that it is. There are hundreds of thousands of Garys across this country, and the system has no clean category for them because they are not unemployed, not homeless, not in crisis in any visible way. They have simply withdrawn from the project of trying to improve their situation because the evidence in front of them says the project is not working. This is what tapping out looks like at the individual level. And at scale, across an entire country, it produces something that economists call a decline in economic participation, but which feels from the inside like something much heavier than that. A like helps more people find it, takes 1 second. If this is landing close to home, that one small thing matters more than you might think. Now here is where it gets harder to talk about. Because tapping out is not just a financial decision. It reshapes how people feel about where they live, who they trust, and what they think the future holds. There is a body of research from the Institute for Fiscal Studies that tracks not just income and wealth, but what it calls economic confidence, the sense that effort will be rewarded over time. And what that research shows, consistently and across multiple surveys over the past decade, is that the gap between those who feel confident about the future and those who do not has widened dramatically. And it has widened fastest, not among the very poorest, but among people in the middle, working people, people who thought they were doing the right things. That gap matters because economic confidence is not just a feeling. It drives behavior. People who believe effort will be rewarded keep trying. They upskill, they save, they invest time and energy in their communities. People who have stopped believing that do not. They cannot afford to. The risk of trying and failing when you have nothing left in reserve is too high. And so you get what researchers describe as low-effort equilibrium. A quiet, stable, invisible withdrawal from participation. People who show up, do enough to get by, and have mentally closed the door on anything more ambitious. Not because they lack ability or drive, because the incentive structure they were promised has been dismantled, and nobody has been honest enough to say so out loud. Drop your town in the comments. Because if what you are hearing right now matches what you can see from your own front door, that is not a coincidence, and you are not alone. To be fair, and this matters, tapping out is not entirely the result of one set of decisions or one era of policy. There are structural forces at work here that go back decades. Deindustrialization hollowed out communities long before the cost of living became the daily obsession it is now. The transition from defined benefit pensions to defined contribution schemes, which effectively shifted retirement risk from employers to individuals, happened quietly over 30 years and left millions exposed in ways they are only now discovering. The decline of social housing, the rise of the private rental sector as the only option for millions of people who will never save a deposit, these are not recent emergencies. They are the accumulated weight of choices made across generations and governments, and nobody has clean hands. That honest admission does not make the situation less serious. If anything, it makes it more so. Because it means there is no simple reversal. There is no lever somebody could pull tomorrow that would make Gary feel the morning after that it is worth trying again. What has changed, and this is the part that most commentary misses, is the speed at which the disillusionment has moved down the age range. When people used to talk about the generation that had given up, they meant people in their 50s and 60s who had been displaced by deindustrialization and never fully recovered. That was a tragedy. And it was real. But it was bounded. It had a human timeline. You could tell yourself that the next generation would do better. You cannot tell yourself that anymore with a straight face. The fastest growing group of people who describe themselves as having stopped trying to get ahead, according to surveys tracking economic sentiment across the United Kingdom, is people in their late 20s and 30s. People who entered the workforce after the financial crisis of 2008, who came of age during austerity, who tried to save for a deposit and watched the price of every house they could have afforded rise by 30 or 40,000 pounds while they were saving, and who have concluded, not unreasonably, that the game is not fair and the rules keep changing. These are not people who are asking for much. A flat they can afford to rent long-term, a job that covers the basics without a second job on the side. A rough sense that if they stay disciplined, things will be okay. That is not an ambitious ask. It used to be the baseline. And for a rapidly growing number of people, the baseline has moved beyond reach. When a generation of young working people reaches that conclusion, the consequences do not stay private for long. They show up in spending patterns, in birth rates, in the hollowing out of high streets and market towns that used to be anchored by young families. They show up in the data on long-term sickness absence, which has risen sharply, and which contains within it a significant number of people who are not clinically unwell in any straightforward sense, but who have lost the energy to maintain the effort that modern working life demands when nothing seems to be accumulating in return. And here is what nobody is talking about openly. The town centers are not emptying because people are lazy or have stopped caring about their communities. They are emptying because the people who used to fill them have done a private accounting exercise and concluded that the cost of participating financially, emotionally, practically, is higher than what they are getting back. That is not a moral failing. That is a feedback loop, and once enough people make the same calculation, it becomes self-reinforcing. The high street loses another anchor store. Another community center closes because the council cannot fund it. Another GP surgery reduces its hours. And the next person running that calculation looks at that evidence and concludes, faster and with more certainty, that things are getting worse and not better. Britain has been through harder times than this and come out the other side. That is worth saying. The country has a long record of absorbing shocks that looked, at the time, like permanent decline. And there are people, communities, corners of this country that are finding ways to hold together, to adapt, to build something new from what is left. That is also real, and it deserves acknowledgement. But those stories tend to share a common thread. They happen in places where people still believe, at some basic level, that effort connects to outcome, where the feedback loop still works, where you can point to something, a renovated library, a community garden, a local business that survived and say, we did that and it made a difference. The places where tapping out has taken the deepest root are the places where that thread has snapped, where the visible evidence of decline is so consistent and so long-running that it has become the shared assumption, where the question is no longer how do we improve things, but how do we protect what is left? And the honest question, the one that this country is not quite ready to ask out loud yet, is how many more places are about to cross that line? You already know the answer in your area. You can feel it when you walk through the town center on a Saturday afternoon. You can hear it in the conversations at the Tesco checkout or in the waiting room at the doctor's surgery. You can see it in the faces of people who are working harder than they have ever worked in their lives and are further behind than they have ever been. The people who have tapped out are not a different kind of person. They are not weaker or less capable than the people who have not. They ran the same numbers you are running. They just ran them a little earlier, or in a place where the maths got impossible a little sooner. So the question is not really about them. The question is about what it takes, in a country with Britain's history and Britain's resources, to make the maths add up again for the people who are still trying. And whether anyone in a position to change the equation is genuinely watching what is happening on these streets. What do you see where you live? Is the thread still holding, or has it already snapped?